All right, we're heading deep into the desolate northern Ural Mountains. The year is 1959. It's the dead of winter. We're here to investigate one of the most chilling, most baffling, unsolved mysteries of the entire 20th century. What you are about to hear is a story of sheer terror, utter confusion, and some kind of force so powerful it drove 9 incredibly experienced mountaineers straight to their doom.
I wonder what awaits us. Will anything new happen? Those are the final recorded words of 22-year-old Zinaida Kolmogorova. She was a brilliant radio engineering student, a really seasoned hiker. She just scribbled this in her diary while on a train, carrying her and her friends toward a vast wilderness that was, well, about to swallow them whole. It left behind a scene of just pure, inexplicable horror.
So, it's late January 1959. 10 young people, most of them students from the Ural Polytechnic Institute, they set out on a trek. Now, this wasn't just some weekend camping trip. They were aiming for their Grade 3 certification. This was the highest honor for hikers in the entire Soviet Union. This was the absolute pinnacle of their passion, a journey that was designed to test their limits against one of the most unforgiving environments on the face of the Earth. And you have to understand, the caliber of this group was just off the charts. They were led by a 23-year-old engineering student, Igor Dyatlov. He was brilliant. The whole team was tough, capable, deeply experienced in the absolute hardships of winter expeditions. These were the best of the best. And luckily for us, they documented their journey in diaries and with cameras, capturing their high spirits and the stark, frozen beauty of the Urals. But one of them, Yuri Yudin, he was forced to turn back early. He had this severe joint pain, and he just couldn't go on. It was a decision that would absolutely haunt him for the rest of his life, but it's also the only reason he survived.
They were supposed to send a telegram from their destination on February 12th. When that day came and went with absolutely no word, their family started to get uneasy. Now, at first, nobody really panicked. Delays were common in the brutal Ural winters, and this group, of all people, was more than capable of handling a blizzard. But then, the days started to turn into a week, and a full-scale search and rescue mission, we're talking planes, helicopters, soldiers, was launched.
Finally, on February 26th, after weeks of searching, a helicopter pilot spots their campsite. It's on the slopes of a mountain known to the indigenous Manzi people as Kholat Syakhl. Ominously, that name translates to Dead Mountain. The rescue team on the ground, well, they had to be bracing for the worst as they approached this strange, silent scene.
The very first clue to the tragedy was just deeply, deeply unsettling. The tent. Their only shelter against the sub-zero wilderness. It wasn't ripped apart by an animal or the weather. No, it had been deliberately and frantically sliced open with a knife from the inside. Think about that for a second. Something terrified them so badly, they couldn't even take the few seconds needed to untie the entrance flap. They had to cut their way out into a freezing, stormy night.
And this discovery, it created the central paradox of this entire mystery. Inside the tent, there were no signs of a struggle, no signs of foul play. All their gear, their worn clothing, their boots lined up in this neat little formation, even their money. It was all there. A meal of sliced ham and cocoa was laid out, like they were literally moments away from eating. It was a picture of perfect order, violently interrupted by a panicked escape into certain death.
The abandoned tent was bizarre, yeah, but it raised a much more urgent and terrifying question. Where did they go? They had fled into a blizzard, with temperatures plummeting below -20 Celsius, without shoes or proper coats. Why? What could possibly compel 9 experienced survivalists to make a decision that was, for all intents and purposes, suicide? A trail of footprints told this grim, grim story. Investigators followed 9 sets of tracks leading away from the tent, down the slope towards a thicket of woods almost a mile away. Some of them were barefoot, others only in socks. The first 2 bodies, Yuri Doroshenko and Georgy Krivonashenko, they were found beneath this massive cedar tree, stripped down to their underwear, with the remains of a tiny fire nearby. Then, spaced out on the path back toward the tent, lay 3 more bodies, including their leader, Igor Dyatlov. Their postures, the way they were found, it suggested a final desperate attempt to crawl back to the very shelter they had so mysteriously fled.
The medical examiner's initial conclusion for these first 5 was pretty simple. They froze to death. Hypothermia. It was a horrible tragedy, but it seemed explainable. Maybe they panicked for some reason, got lost, and succumbed to the elements. A tragic but understandable accident. But the search wasn't over. 4 hikers were still missing, and it would take another 2 months for the spring thaw to finally reveal the true horror of what happened on Dead Mountain.
And this is where the evidence turns this case from a tragedy into a terrifying, unsolvable enigma. In a snowy ravine, buried under more than 10 feet of snow, the final 4 bodies were found. And their injuries would defy every single logical explanation.
The forensic expert, Dr. Boris Vozrozhandy, was just stunned by his findings. He stated that the force required to cause these injuries was, and I quote, astronomical, like being hit by a car at high speed. Yet bizarrely, the bodies showed almost no external signs of trauma. It was as if they had been crushed by some immense pressure that didn't even leave a bruise.
Just take the case of Alexander Zolotaryov. He was the oldest of the group, a WWI veteran. His chest was completely caved in, 5 ribs fractured on his right side. The coroner was very clear. These injuries were inflicted while he was still alive and could not have been caused by another human because the force was just too great and there was no damage to the soft tissue.
And the disturbing details, they didn't end there. Oh no. Nicholas Thibault Brignolles had a fatal skull fracture. And Ludmila Dubinina, one of the 2 women, was found with her chest crushed and was gruesomely missing her tongue and her eyes. And to top it all off, as if this wasn't strange enough, forensic tests on their clothing revealed traces of radioactive contamination. What on earth happened out there? The Soviet investigation was abruptly closed just 3 months after it began. The case files were classified, and the official cause of death was stated to be a compelling natural force that the hikers were unable to overcome. This vague, cryptic conclusion, well, it only fueled decades of speculation and fear. What does that even mean, a compelling natural force?
For more than 60 years, that phrase, a compelling natural force, has just haunted investigators and researchers. The case was actually reopened in 2019, but the mystery absolutely endures. So let's look at the leading theories that attempt to explain the unexplainable.
Okay, so the most widely accepted official theory is a rare type of slab avalanche. The idea is that a slab of snow slid down, panicked the hikers, maybe caused some of the internal injuries. But this theory is just full of holes. The slope was less than 30 degrees, which is not typically steep enough for an avalanche. The tent itself wasn't fully buried, and investigators found 0 evidence of a slide. Plus, an avalanche doesn't explain the radiation or why they would run so far from their only shelter. It just doesn't add up. So this leads us to a much more sinister theory. The area was rumored to be used for secret Soviet military tests. Did the hikers just stumble upon something they shouldn't have seen? You know, a concussion bomb or some kind of radiological weapon could potentially explain the crushing internal injuries, the lack of external trauma, and of course, the radioactive traces. It would also explain why the government so quickly classified the files and sealed the entire area for 3 years after the incident.
Now for a really fascinating scientific explanation. The unique dome shape of the mountain, combined with high winds, could have generated a phenomenon known as a Kármán vortex street. Now this creates powerful, low-frequency sound waves called infrasound. It's a sound so low it's more of a feeling than a noise. And while you can't hear it, infrasound can have bizarre physiological effects on the human body, including intense, debilitating panic, nausea, and this feeling of overwhelming dread. It could have literally triggered their primal flight response, making them irrationally flee their tent in a state of pure, unadulterated terror.
And here's the problem. The infrasound theory, as cool as it is, it explains the panicked flight, but it doesn't explain the crushing injuries or the radiation. The military test theory, well, it explains the injuries and radiation, but it's based mostly on speculation. And the avalanche theory, while it's officially supported, seems to completely contradict the evidence at the scene. No single theory perfectly accounts for every single bizarre detail of the case. So, we are left with a story that's just frozen in time. A picture of 9 vibrant young people full of life who met an end so violent and so strange that it defies explanation. The files are open, but the truth remains elusive, a chilling ghost story whispered on the winds of Dead Mountain. What really happened that night remains one of history's most terrifying question marks.